Are you excited?
I never actually had an Atari
You
computer.
know why? Because you had a Commodore 64.
Yeah, I came to it late in the game, and I didn't really have
That
a
was the forgotten console war, computer war, Commodore versus Atari.
yeah, and I came to it late, and it was my mother pushing for it more than I was.
Yeah,
I enjoyed my Atari 2600 for games. She's like, "No, you need a real computer for typing and doing
yeah,
schoolwork
yeah.
and blah 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 blah." And that's why she went with a Commodore. And I was like, "Oh, you can still play games on this. Okay, great." And I started getting all the games for Commodore 64. But that was somebody told my mom that Commodore 64 at the time was what she should get. It was the best at the time. Apparently, this Atari 400 was better.
Let me read the article, then I'll
Okay,
explain. I'm going
okay.
to give you a little history lesson on this, but retro video game fans have another mini console to contend with. This time, a recreation of the Atari 400. Playleon and Retro Games Limited have announced a $119.99 400 Mini, a scaled down recreation of the 8-bit Atari 400, which was first.
Jeez.
What?
8-bit. Oh my gosh.
That you don't understand. That was a big deal. The NES
I
was
know.
technically 8-bit.
I
So
know.
let's not be making fun of this Atari computer, which was first launched in 1979. The 400 Mini, due out on March 28th, 2024, includes 25 Atari games pre-installed, each selected from a carousel that includes the likes of Berserk.
There you go. I was just
I
talking
thought I
about that.
heard that somewhere. I was like, why does that sound familiar? Did I read that somewhere that it was on? It was.
Yep.
Lee, which I guess is a Bruce Lee video game. Millipede, that's the follow-up to Centipede.
Yep.
Miner 2049er.
I love that. I had it on the Commodore
On the
64.
Commodore, yeah. Mule is going to be on this. Do you remember Mule at
Oh,
all?
my buddy Otto had that. I had a hard time getting into that
It's
one.
a weird. It almost has a board game aesthetic. It's like a Monopoly style game in a way, but it's like about you're like space and you're using
Yeah.
wheels. I don't know. And Star Raiders too. You can save and resume your game at any time and rewind by up to for 30 seconds. The 400 Mini comes with an updated CX40 joystick, dubbed the C Stick, which features an additional 7 functions and USB, making compatible with a wide range of consoles. Can I use the CX stick on my Switch? That'd be funny
I know, right?
if I'm playing Mario Wonder with this old Atari controller. Here are the key features courtesy of PlayOn. Half-size version of the distinctly styled Atari 400, emulating the whole 8-bit Atari range from the 400 to the 800 XL and the Atari 5200 home console. Also included is a recreation of the classic Atari CX4 joystick. I already mentioned that. The ability for players to slide load their own games via USB stick with support for cartridges, disc, and cassette ROMs. That's the big deal for me.
Yeah.
If I can use ROMs, and I think you can find these over at Atari Age, and before people start screaming piracy to me, no one's making money off of this stuff anymore. Leave it alone,
Right.
all right?
Yeah,
If I want to play
exactly.
some old Infocom games, let me. I bought a bunch of them back then. I think I bought a complete disc of Infocom games. As
Yeah.
far as I'm concerned, this is so remember the Infocom games were on the Atari computer as well.
I
Rewind
want everybody that is watching right now, look at that picture and imagine trying to type on that bastard.
this is a 400. They got better later on.
Yeah.
That is not even a real keyboard. That's some weird touchpad thing, right?
Yep. Yep.
See, back then they knew touchpads were bad, and they gave up on them, and now we have them back. Later Atari computers had an actual built-in keyboard, much like the Commodore did.
Right.
Okay, the 800, the one I had a built-in keyboard. It was
It's
neat.
what we still have to this day, that sort
Basically,
of
yeah.
keyboard. That, and oh, the worst would be like one of the keys that you would use the most, the connector underneath it would fail, and so you couldn't type a D anymore or something
Yep.
like that.
Yeah, because they weren't external keyboards where you just go out and buy yourself a new keyboard. Why do I have a suspicion that that's something Apple did, where like the PCs were having external keyboards, and Apple would say, "No, it has to be built in." It's like, but Steve, they're like
Exactly.
the other one. Steve was yelling at their Steve. We need just to be able to hook up a keyboard. No, you know, it's, but no, even back then, yeah, the keyboards were built in. To be fair, there's something to be said for having everything right out of the box.
True.
You did have to buy an external floppy drive for this thing.
Yep.
In fact, I think the Commodore 64 discs were were they the hard blue discs or were they the larger floppies on the
I want
Commodore?
to say larger floppy.
Because I had larger floppies for this. Look and
I
feel.
think this predates the smaller ones.
Yes, this was the first Atari computer. You can also buy the C6 separately. I might pick one of these up. I am very tempted because this was my introduction to video games.
Look at those control jacks there. That's where you put
you
the
plug it right in the front.
Yep,
Now these are
yep.
USB sticks. I wonder if you can put other USB controllers in here.
Look at that, player 1, player 2, player 3,
Exactly.
player 4.
In the old days, you would press the button and the lid, and you would put the cartridge inside. It came with cartridges.
Yep.
This is the cover.
I remember that cover, yeah.
This is an old Electronic Arts. Electronic Arts existed back then. They were a big supporter of the Atari computers and Commodore 64. Mule was released by them. This apparently is the 800 version of Missile Command.
Yep.
Looks pretty good. Looks actually better than what you would get on the 2600. The closest Atari console, I think, to this is the Atari 5200 console, which I think that you can play the games on this as well. It will run 5200. There's Boulder Dash. Have you ever played that?
Don't know that one. No,
okay.
I don't know that one.
Millipede.
Yeah.
I'm trying to pick games that were actually going to be on this thing. But like I said, you can load your own ROMs onto this.
Wow.
And this could open up a lot of doors. There is a version of Donkey Kong on the Atari computer I want to check out.
Wow.
So I may end up picking one of these.
If it's anything like the one, oh gosh, who was the company that put it out for the Atari 2600? Was that, it wasn't Activision, was it? Who was it?
Well, I don't know. It was either Activision or Atari in the 2600. That was.
It wasn't Atari, so it must have been Activision. It was terrible. It was just terrible. I mean, it was fun enough, but it was very disappointing for someone who wanted that same game that they played in the arcade. Yeah.
Interesting trivia for Boomer here. You know what? My first video game, my dad got it for me, I think, as a birthday present. It was for the Atari 800 computer. Guess which game?
Combat.
Nope. Dig Dug. Dig Dug. The classic Namco arcade game. Pac-Man gets more attention, but Dig Dug was another big Namco game from back in the day.
Nice.
I had Dig Dug. I had Deluxe Invaders, which I realized was short for Deluxe Space Invaders. It was actually a Space Invaders game. It wasn't some knockoff.
Interesting.
I had Demons Attack. I think that was an Activision game, which was their own take on Space Invaders, where the things would fly down at you and jump all over the place. It was pretty impressive. I had Pitfall for the Atari 800 computer.
I did like Pitfall, yes.
I had some decent games for the time. I had the Return of the Jedi game, Destroy the Death Star, where you would be the little Millennium Falcon. Did you have that on Commodore? Or maybe you played it over a friend's house, maybe?
I played it at a friend's house,
yes. Yeah. And my brother would get a lot of the floppy disk games. Now, I have to tell you, the floppy disk, I was a kid at the time. I was like 4 or 5 or 5 or 6. So, like, the floppy drive was like this big forbidden thing I couldn't touch.
Yeah.
Because I would want to play the floppy games, but I think I was afraid that I would mess something up and get into trouble. Because you had to like load them up. It was this real complicated where you had to plug it in. Then you'd have to. Oh, you know what it is? There were key commands to load them. I didn't know what those key commands were.
Oh, right.
The cartridges you could just put in and they would play, but the other stuff was more fancy. There was a cassette tape thing, and you could play games on cassette, like audio cassette. They were audio cassettes, but they had games on them. And I remember there was one called Crush, Crumble, and Chomp, which I guess was like their Godzilla-style game where you could play as a monster and destroy a city. I had one of those cassette games. It was called Preppy, which was basically a knockoff of Frogger, but I actually liked it better than Frogger. I guess you were playing a preppy guy instead of a frog trying to get across things. But no, I mean, people see it as primitive now, but at the time, this was state-of-the-art. You were getting closer to the arcade games with this system than you were on anything else at the time. This was not our... Before this, we had the Magnavox Odyssey. We didn't have an Atari 2600, but we did get the Atari computer later on. And this was my main mode of gaming for a long time. I want to say almost up to the NES, because we did get an IBM PC compatible computer, but it was junk. The games would never run right on it. And after that, we got an NES. But this was really my first introduction to games. So I may have to pick this up for nostalgia purposes, especially if I can load ROMs onto this thing with no trouble. I want Mountain King. You know Mountain King?
I do not. I'm sorry.
Okay, we'll talk about that some other day.